Hey everybody, Brett from AstartesGaming here, back with another Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord developer blog update. Today we're going to be taking a look at the developer blog for September 28th, 2017. I'm a couple days late, I apologize for that. They release these at awkward times for me. It's like Thursday morning, so I'm usually on my way out the door by the time that these are updated. Occasionally I'll have time to crank out a video real quick before I leave, but generally not. So, if they don't come out Thursday, just try to be patient. I'll try to have them out as soon as I possibly can. Usually Friday or Saturday. Anywho, today we're getting a Q&A with Meric Neseli, who is the quality assurance tester for Bannerlord. Basically, he's in charge of making sure that there's no bugs or glitches. Probably a difficult job. Everybody here, I'm sure, has played Warband, and there is no shortage of bugs and glitches in that game. So I imagine he's got a pretty difficult job over there at Tail Worlds. Anywho, let's jump into the questions and answers. So he's from Istanbul, Turkey, as it seems like most of the team is from either Istanbul or the area around it. He's been with them since February 2015, so he's a relatively recent addition. They brought him on well after Bannerlord was, beginning to be worked on. In fact, 2015 is the year, toward the end of the year, they initially wanted to do like an early access or beta, so they were well into the development at that point. He's obviously a computer engineer, as just about everybody at a game developing studio is going to be, unless of course they're in charge of like artwork or things like that. And then his official job description is the QA lead and game designer. And so what does he normally do during the day? In the morning, I organize and allocate the day's assignments for the rest of my team. Our daily tests revolve around testing features for both the game and the game engine. We test the functionality of newly added features and track general development day by day to ensure that the game is still stable after changes to the code. In the afternoon, I attend a meeting with members of our various teams. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the development process and establish which features need our immediate attention and testing. Naturally, the QA team gets to spend a lot more time playing Bannerlord than the rest of our colleagues, which means that we have a somewhat deeper understanding of their current state of the game than others. We get to see the long-term effects of design decisions and offer our feedback. If a feature is still interesting after hundreds of hours of gameplay, then that is a good indication that the right decision was made during the design stage. So it sounds like he's actually got a pretty great job. He's playing Bannerlord more than anybody, it sounds like. Although we did hear that the CEO of the company said he played for at least like what, 1 or 2 hours a day, just to get an idea of where the game was currently at. But it sounds like these guys, this team, their job is pretty much to just play the game all day and see how features work out, what needs to be changed, what needs to be fixed. Man, I should become a QA tester. That sounds like a fantastic job. So what does he like the most about Bannerlord currently? He likes the wide variety of things about the game. Battle strategy, the teamwork required in multiplayer, the different factions, each with their own distinctive culture. There's just so much that I enjoy, too much that he enjoys to narrow it down to a single choice. So we don't get any sort of substance from that answer. What's the most difficult thing that you solved so far during the production of the game? Balancing troops. In Bannerlord, each faction has their own unique troops. Although unique troops offer some advantages over regular troops, we still have to strike a balance with how these units compare to similar troops within their own faction and how they will perform against units from each of the other factions. Each faction has their own advantages and disadvantages when it comes to army compositions. For example, the Empire's core units are heavy infantry, which are more durable than other infantry in Calradia. We need to select their perks and equipment in a way which will provide them with this advantage, yet exposes them to risk. In this case, the weakness of heavy infantry is shock infantry, such as the Falksmen of Battania. A good strategy to employ with the Empire, is to use infantry and range units in close proximity so that they can provide support to each other against their counter troop types. Another balance issue is the cost of troops, which is set according to the power of the unit. In Captain mode, we had to handle this a little differently because money doesn't feature in this game mode. We decided to alter the troop count instead of the price, with the reasoning that all players have the same amount of funds and therefore the stronger units should have fewer soldiers because their recruitment and upkeep costs would be higher. So there's a lot to read into that there. Essentially, in that first paragraph, what he's saying is like they're trying to balance the troops so that, say, like if you're playing as the Volandians, who are like the Swadian precursors, essentially, when you're recruiting their cavalry, you want to make sure that like a tier 1 Volandian, horseman is better than, or excuse me, is worse than like the tier 3 Volandian horsemen. So you want to make sure that not only are they progressively getting better, but it's sort of like a smooth transition and not like tier 1 and tier 2 suck and all of a sudden tier 3 is like the greatest thing ever. So you want that to be smooth. You also want each faction to be balanced in the overall scheme of the game. Something that Warband doesn't do particularly well. If you've ever played like a full campaign of Warband, you know that certain factions tend to get wiped out very, very quickly. And that happens in most playthroughs just because the factions aren't balanced that well in just the overall game. The Kurgit, for example, are an interesting faction, or the Kurgits, or however you want to pronounce it, because they're actually very, very good when the battles are being auto-resolved, but they obviously cannot hold a castle to save their lives when the player is concerned, because their troops are made for running in circles around the enemy, and so the game doesn't really account for that when it's running its, when it's running its algorithms and what have you to calculate who's winning this auto-resolve. But when, the player's actually present and these things actually take place, they get wiped out pretty often. So it's sort of stuff like that that they have to take into consideration. Kind of interesting what they're saying here. Apparently, the heavy infantry of the Empire is weak to shock infantry, such as the Falksmen of Battania. I guess? I mean, I don't know. I could see that sort of being a thing. However, like, typically, I would counter heavy infantry a little bit differently than that, but fine. I do like the strategy he suggests, though. So basically, if you're running Empire, you want to keep your archers and your heavy infantry very close together so that when those lightly armored shock troops or the cavalry comes in to hit you, the archers will be able to sort of thin those ranks down while the heavy infantry provides some sort of buffer for those archers. Although that's a good strategy to employ with just about any faction. So, I mean, that's not like, mind-blowing there. And then, lastly, the cost of the troops. Obviously, the better the troop is, the more they should cost, so that you can't run around with a super inexpensive army of, god-tier units, while somebody else has, like, very average stuff that he's paying a fortune for. That just isn't, it doesn't make sense. You want them to basically be as expensive as they are good, essentially. So currently, he is working on answering blog questions. Just kidding. He's currently working on setting civilian equipment for lords. Lords will wear helmets and heavy armor in battle, but you can see the same lords wearing robes or silk tunics in a lord's hall. The aim of this is to make the world feel more realistic and immersive. Nothing new here. This is also a thing in Warband. Obviously, if you've ever gone to a feast in Warband, you'll know that the lords also have like a civilian outfit for when they're not fighting, and they wear that to the feasts. And then if you fight in like a tournament, for example, they'll be back in their fighting gear unless they have like a dedicated, tournament outfit, and then they'll be wearing that. And then when they go to fight, they'll be back in their other clothes. So yeah, nothing new here. What faction do you like the most in Bannerlord? He likes the Battanians. They have tattoos and battle paint, giving them the look and feel of Celts. They have well-skilled armored archers, and many of their troops use two-handed weapons, the archers included. I find the atmosphere in their large and sparsely populated cities to be fascinating, and even though the cities are mostly ruinous, walking around them feels relaxed. Yeah, I mean, I wish they would have picked a more like coherent sort of inspiration for the Battanians. Initially, it seemed like they were going to go off of a very like Gaelic and Welsh heavy inspiration. They were supposed to be like the best archers in the game, essentially. And so, myself and many people familiar with history assumed that they were going to go for like Welsh longbowmen, because that's, if you think of longbows, that's sort of the first thing you think of, or later the English. But again, at that point, they had sort of, absorbed them. So anyway, the fact that they've included, as he mentioned before, the Battanian Falksmen, which is like a Dacian and Thracian thing. It seems like they're pulling from all over the place, which is fine, but it makes the factions feel a bit just kind of all over the place, at least for those of us who are very familiar with history and recognize these influences. If you're not super familiar with history, you probably don't even notice or care, and that's fine. I do really like the atmosphere and the architecture of the Battanian cities. We've only seen very few of them, but they have a very like organic feel to them. They're very like wood and stone heavy. There's a lot of trees and greenery in them. They're built like in forested areas, so they're very like secluded, at least the ones that we've seen, and I do like that. It would be cool to sort of see, again, drawing from like that Celtic influence, maybe some like old sort of dilapidated empire fortresses that have sort of been abandoned, and the Battanians have moved into them, and they've fallen into disrepair, but they're sort of still being used. But you know, you've got like the vines growing up them and stuff. That would be cool to see. We've seen elements of that, and I like what I've seen from them so far in that case. They still need to work on the super boring armors for them, though. Their armors are so bland. Everything is like gray and brown, whereas like the Empire's running around in like bright purple all the time. Anywho, what kind of processes do you go through while testing scenes and campaign? There's two types of tests that they use. The first one is automated, which is run by code. Some of them are unit tests, others performance tests, they're visual tests, etc. Basically, they test fucking everything. We have several computers running these tests at all times. The second type of tests are manual tests, which are performed by the QA team. We prepared a document for manual tests, which include tests being steps. For each scene and feature, we currently have 5 people working in the QA team, and we focus our work on our field of experience. For example, the editor tester checks engine features daily. Okay, so yeah, they just test a lot of stuff all the time. What was one of the strangest or funniest bugs that they've experienced so far? There was a bug at one stage where everyone in towns, some of them naked, madly started attacking the player. The screenshot came out to be almost like a Renaissance painting. And here's the screenshot. Hopefully you guys can see that. If I click on it, because of the way OBS works, you guys won't be able to see the zoomed in version. So, hopefully, yeah, again, you can kind of see that. That's going to be my thumbnail for sure, though. It's basically just like a bunch of clothed or not so clothed people just like all forming a mosh pit around what I assume is the player. You can't even see the player in there. But that is the end of the Q&A. We didn't get a whole lot of information out of that one, unfortunately. The other Q&As at least had like a nice little nugget of information at the end, something that we hadn't heard before. This one, not so much, so that's a bit disappointing. We did at least get to hear about like sort of where they're at in terms of testing, which is sort of nice. But that's going to be it for this week. Again, last week we had all the modding Q&A stuff, which I'm not really concerned with, even as a modder myself. Until the game is out, I could really care less about that stuff because I want to play the game first to see what needs modding. I don't really have any intention of like diving into the game files before the game files are even completed. I just don't see the point, and you know, considering that all that stuff is still subject to change, it seems ill-advised to get too comfortable with that while it's still being worked on. Next week, I don't know what we're getting. I'm sure somewhere in the forums they probably mentioned it, but I don't keep up with those. So I'm expecting another Q&A, but it would be nice if we could finally hear something more about the single-player campaign, because that is what I'm concerned about. I know a lot of people are as well. Multiplayer is a big thing too. We can't neglect multiplayer. Personally, I don't play it. However, multiplayer is a big deal in the Warband community. It's part of the reason that Warband has stuck around for so long, so that can't be neglected either, as much as some of the people in the comments would like to think otherwise. Again, a lot of the modding community is making these mods for like multiplayer servers. There's a lot of groups that still play, they do like Civil War reenactment in Warband essentially. Or I've seen there's a lot of people doing like Roman stuff in a similar vein. Obviously the Napoleonic Wars stuff is going on as well. But yeah, a big part of the modding community is making stuff for like multiplayer. almost like milsim type stuff, depending on how seriously they take it. So can't neglect that either, as much as a lot of people want to say just screw the multiplayer, you know, give me the single player campaign as soon as it's done. Both are important. Both are important. I really care about the campaign, and I'm hoping that we get more from that. Anyways, I've rambled long enough, so thank you guys so much for watching. I had a great time talking about some Bannerlord with you as always, and I look forward to seeing you guys back here for the next devblog video.